Hey folks, welcome to the channel. This week I got my buddy Rick Hall here in my shop. What are we going to be doing?
We're going to be making some Damascus hammers.
Damascus hammers. I love it. I've never made a hammer. What kind of hammer are you going to make?
I'm going to make a cross peen, not like a French cross peen, but a regular cross peen.
I think I have a cross peen. I got a straight peen on order. I think I'm going to try the diagonal peen hammer.
Oh yeah, fun diagonals.
All right, let's get into it.
Okay.
We're starting here with a billet that Rick prepped at home. It's a 25 layer stack, 1 inch by 6 inches, and right now we're just setting the weld. It's always interesting when you go to somebody else's shop and have to use their equipment that you're not used to. This was Rick getting used to my press. As you can see, it didn't take him long. The construction of the final billet will be alternating layers of high layer and low layer. The stack that Rick is working on will be the 25 layer sections. This may look like a lot of Damascus, and there's more coming, but remember, we're making 2 of those final billets that you saw. One for Rick and one for me, each to make a hammer. Rick's done forging this billet. We're going to set it aside and move on to the next step. Now it's my turn. I'm starting with another stack of 25 layers, but this time we're going to be drawing it out really long and restacking it 4 times to give us 100 layers. You'll notice that Rick started with a stack that was 1 inch wide and 6 inches long, and I started with one that was 1.5 inches wide and 4 inches long. So it really doesn't matter. We can manipulate this into whatever we want. We've pretty much got the length we need now. Now we're just going to flatten it out, make sure it's nice and flat and even, and then we're going to cut it up and go to the next step. While we were waiting for our billets to cool, Rick spent a little time at the grinder just dressing up the drift. It's important that the sides of the drift have flat sides and they're not curved. That helps us correct some things. We'll see later. So here's my billet, cut up into 4, ground the edges and restacked. Now we're going to weld that together and forge that into a 100 layer billet. Since we're going to be merging this with Rick's billet, I got to make sure I maintain the same width as his so they all fit together nicely. Remember, this 100 layer billet is going to be placed here in the final billet, but we're making 2 billets, so we need 6 pieces. So we got to draw this out pretty long. I think we got the length we need. Now we just need to make sure it's nice and flat. That helps us reduce the grinding we have to do. Here are those Damascus pieces all cut up, and there's a separator of 1084 to give us a nice black strip in between. Now it's time to forge weld the layers together and kind of make them into hammer shapes before we drift the hole. We were actually doing these at the same time, interleaved, but I'm going to show you Rick's hammer and then mine, just so you don't get confused. This is the point where I think Rick's hammer design went a little sideways. And this is when you use someone else's machine, you don't really know it perfectly. Well, he pressed this a little too much and got a little too much length out of it. The rest is going to be correcting that, or trying to. After a few tries correcting this, Rick decided to just change his design into a dog's head hammer, because we don't make mistakes, we just make longer hammers. And now the fun part of punching the hole. This actually went really easy with the punch in the press. Now it's my turn. I forge weld my billet together, but after watching Rick, I decided to change my design as well. Since I don't really know what I'm doing when it comes to forging a hammer, I figure I would make it a little simpler and just go with a straight peen instead of a diagonal peen. Here I'm putting the basics of the straight peen in just so I know where I'm going to drift my hole. I found knowing the proportions of the front of the hammer and the peen side of the hammer quite challenging. At this point, I think I've got the basic shape forged enough that I can start punching the hole. This is where I wish I would have spent a little more time thinking about it, because I actually don't end up getting the hole exactly where I want, and you'll see later. Now that the holes are punched, we take the billets over to the swage block and use a drift, and that's going to widen that hole and eventually get it wide enough to put a hammer handle in it. We're starting here with Rick's hammer. The hole actually drifts pretty well. We get it pretty straight. And now we use the bigger drift, which is going to be our final size. With a hammer, unlike an axe, you drift from both sides. Then when the wedge goes in the top, it locks it in. The hole was drifted just slightly off, so we're using a flatter here, and that's why it's helpful for the drift to have flat sides, so now when we hammer on the side, it'll kind of straighten it out. This completes all the forging we're going to do on Rick's hammer. Now on to mine, which gives me a little more issues. So here I am putting the first drift in. The issues really lie around the drift wanting to twist and kind of turn as it gets hammered in. This obviously presents a problem. Here we're deciding what we're going to do. We finally end up on putting the drift in sideways, widening the hole, and then putting the drift back in, and that really ends up straightening it out. Rick and I did a whole bunch of grinding on our hammers after this. We didn't film it, so we're going to take you right into the heat treat. There was a lot of mass here to cool down, but I think we got it. Since the oil in the bucket was still hot, Rick used the vertical quench tank.
So here's the finished hammerhead. It looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it. I don't want to touch the outside here because it's nice and sanded. Now let's get it into the etch and see what the pattern looks like.
For the handles, we decided to use some beautiful Purple Heart. This is stuff I had left over from the axe build, but I think it's going to look really good on these hammers.
So here it is after etching. It came out a little splotchy in a couple of places, but that's alright. This is just for me. let's get it on a handle. The handle, we're going to be using this Purple Heart, which I've already shaped up. I got to cut the kerf in it, and then we're going to hammer it on, put the wedge in, and we'll be done. So here's the completed hammer. The Damascus came out a little fuzzy. I think the heat treat wasn't perfect, but still looks pretty cool. It's just for me anyway, so I don't really care that much. Yeah, it's pretty cool for my first hammer. I got some of this wax from Rogue Forge, so I'm going to just put this on the handle. This is that Purple Heart, so just to preserve that a little bit, bring out the color, and I'll also put this on the head of the hammer. So that's really making it pop. So pretty cool stuff. I'll put a link in the description if you want to get some of this. Yeah, very cool. Look at that. And it's bringing out the all the stuff on my hands here because it's not entirely cleaned yet, but so I'm pretty happy with that as my first hammer. Things I would change. I would center up the eye a little bit more. Again, I wanted this to be a straight peen, but I wish I would have centered this just a little bit over that way a little more, but I don't think it's a big deal. I will probably end up using this as a straight peen more than the face of the hammer anyway. But pretty cool. I'm happy with it. Thanks to Rick for coming over and helping with the tooling. I'll put some shots of his hammer as well. So thanks for joining me, folks. We'll see you on the next one.